Hey guys, Thomas the Solution here, aka Mustached Tom, here to review All the Money in the World, a movie made by Ridley Scott that features a story based on true events where the grandson of this very rich man was kidnapped, and this is essentially a fictionalized story of those events that apparently took place sometime in the early 1970s. Like, I believe the year specifically, the movie started in 1973. We learn that the son who was captured, his name is Paul. He was taken shortly after he was like walking home or whatever he was walking. And this time and era, the richest person happened to be his grandfather, uh, or who's played by Christopher Plummer, uh, or I'll just call him Grandpa Getty for the sake of this review and simplicity's sake. But yeah, he was this owner of this oil from a certain location, so that allowed him to accumulate most of his riches. And he states that getting rich is easy, but once you are rich, you can become that other person, or it sort of shifts who you are, and this movie sort of deals with that situation a little bit more as the movie progresses. So yes, the mother is called about the situation, about of how the son was captured, and so on and so forth. They do a little title drop, and then they do this little flashback to show how the family was poor beforehand, and how they were eventually all called up to move up to Rome, where they would meet Grandpa Getty. So he wanted to give Paul, the one who was kidnapped, a gift, so he gave him a little like statuette figure. And he talks about how he couldn't be weighed down by family and so on and so forth. So we see that Paul used to write for the grandpa, and how it would bring fortune to their first home, and how he wanted to build this dynasty. So we see that Paul's dad became a drunk, or at some point in the past point became a drunk and kind of maintained that status. And then the mother wanted a divorce, and then time skips a little bit quicker during the middle part of the movie, as they go through the later part of October. And Paul felt like he was betrayed or whatever. So the grandfather tells that he's not going to pay, and then we are introduced to Mark Wahlberg's character, who plays Mr. Chase, the guy you see on the right hand side of the poster, who's a sort of investigator slash spy, I guess, who works for Getty, Grandpa Getty, that is. So from this point on, he's trying to figure out how to get the son back with as little money spent as possible. And we cut back to the estate in England, where the mother is talking with him, talking with Mr. Chase about the whereabouts of the thieves, and how, if it's even a real theft that happened in the first place. And then we get a little bit more on the money situation from Grandpa Getty that says, a man with children gives hostages a fortune, or something along those lines. So, Getty wants the mother out of the situation, but she insists on getting herself involved and staying involved in the case. So she ends up traveling with Chase while they are hounded by paparazzi. They get to this hotel where they're like co-working and stuff, and Chase talks about how he's a spy, and he opens up about all that stuff. We see that Paul was writing letters as he was kidnapped. So he sees who his kidnapper is, and he's like, "Oh, okay, I won't tell anybody," and so on and so forth. But while that's happening, Mr. Chase meets with a false kidnapper, and that phase of it being a joke comes back, and this whole like was it a whole like setup thing comes back into play, and ends up not being the case. It ends up being like they try to gun down the area, and they end up not finding where he is, and he ends up being moved and attempt to being sold to somebody else. But the mother finds the notes, so she knows that at least at the very case that he was alive during that period. So the grandpa talks about how if a oil spill happened, how he would suddenly become, his money would probably just vanish in an instant. But I think he just says I want more, but I don't know if that was implying generally to more money or if he was talking about more items in his house, which can go right back to the money. So I assume it's the money. Anyway, the mother gets the call for this deal. The deal is like $7 million for the son. But she doesn't have that money herself, and he does, and he's still saying like no at that point. So and then it shows like him like buying this picture. It's like a weird scene that's in the movie where he's like, "Oh, I'll buy this picture for like however much it was," instead of getting his son back for much more money. So there's that. So the son spits some smoke outside, and he sets fire to the location. He's able to run out and try to seek shelter. He calls his mom, but his call gets broken up, and then he gets caught right back into the situation he was in prior. The mother is trying to sell this trinket that Mr. Getty gave his grandson earlier in the movie, but the price ended up being like way lower than it, she was told it was initially from him. So the son gets his ear cut off, and then that whole part comes to them in the mail, essentially. So they see the picture and they see the ear, the mother and Mr. Chase. So they want to put in the paper that this situation has happened, and they send several papers to Mr. Grandpa Getty in order to try to convince him that that he should give the money while they start to move on. And meanwhile, his condition is getting worse and worse as the movie is wrapping up. So she wants to, since she only had a certain amount of money or could obtain a certain amount of money, she wanted to fake having the amount of money and then trying to make that deal. So, Chase then meets with Grandpa Getty and then ends up leaving him to his own fate. So they go to make the exchange for the money. In the instructions as they are traveling are very specific to drop the money off and to sort of head off. and Paul is let go. But the group that saw that was making the deal, they saw this helicopter, so they started moving things around. And Paul decides to start running because the cars are moving in and they are looking for him specifically. So he's left out in the streets while the mom is trying to find him as well. And it would appear, now this part was very vague, so this part was very vague, and it seems like Chase, again played by Mark Wahlberg, knew the kidnapper by the name, and I think that was to imply that he was in on it all along, maybe? I don't know. Like, I don't know what that scene was meant to do. That's kind of what it insinuated. Again, it was pretty vague. They said, just, I believe Chase said the kidnapper's name, and that's all it was. So again, I don't know if that implies that he was in on it or not, but if you can make heads or tails on it, let me know in the comments. So anyways, we do see that Grandpa Getty dies at the end of the movie, and the investors talk about where the money is going to end up going. The mother ends up inheriting all of that money, I suppose. So she gets her son back, and then she gets all the riches that came along with it because Mr. Grandpa Getty had this very specific will that said that he couldn't spend any money, but he could invest it. So I guess he just stockpiled the money for if a situation ever came up like this, and if he ever passed, to pass the money along to the next inheritance. So that is all the money in the world, and it's a pretty interesting movie. Money versus family, that sort of weird debate. And I find myself as a person to, in real life, to have just enough money to get by, but never have, that type of money, that crazy amount of where you just don't know what to do with it all. So, in some parts of the movie did feel a little bit rushed. As I mentioned, toward the middle, it did feel a little bit rushed. But other than that, it was a pretty interesting look into this situation and how similar situations in more current times kind of, it feels like it has a very current status, even though it happened a long time ago. So pretty interesting stuff. I think it's worth checking out. I'd give it a 6 out of 10. I think that, again, it is a little bit rushed in some parts to get back to the whole theft part of it, and, the family aspect kind of loses its, luster because it only focuses on one of the children. But I get, since it is based off of the real story, I guess you would focus on the one that was stolen, so I guess that kind of makes sense. But, yeah, that's all I gotta say, and, with that, if you enjoyed this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and also make sure to check out that link in the description. It'll head you over to my Patreon page, and any donations are greatly appreciated. And until next time, everyone, bye!